Welcome, welcome, welcome to Last Video Game Tonight. I am your host, MC Gingerbread. Thank you so much for watching, and let's get right into it. Our main story tonight is about how video games have become the massive dumpster fire, and why is that? Why are they doing this to us? Our three main points are they getting worse? Why are they getting worse? And what can we do about it? But before we get into it, we're going to have a memorial to our video game franchises that have been killed by the companies that everybody wants back. So let's take a look. Alright, so the whole concept I got for this video was by watching multiple reviewers state that they feel like video games might be getting worse. So I decided to look in to see if there was any truth to that fact. I went through the top 100 worst rated games by both critics and players alike on multiple websites and compiled them into 3 different decades: the 2020s, the 2010s, and the 2000s. And I took account for how many games went into each decade. The majority of the games that were rated poorly were in the 2010s decade, but 2020s was very close behind and the 2000s was very low off. But take into account that the 2020s only had 2 years to go off of, and it's already super close to the 2010s that had 10 years of compiling games. Now I know what you must be thinking. Yeah, of course, there's more video games coming out because they weren't as popular as back then as they are now, so it's easily skewed. But I also took into account the AAA games, the big market franchise games, and that is where you really get the full picture of how bad this epidemic is. The 2020s has by far the highest amount of low-rated AAA games out of any of the decades. 60%, at least 60%, was the 2020 games are AAA big-name franchises, whereas in the 2010s, it's about 10%, 20%, and then the 2000s, it's like literally less than 1%. So that is where you really understand that it seems like video games are indeed getting worse. By this margin, you can see that video game quality has had a massive downturn in quality. Like, shit, one of my most anticipated games of 2022 is Stray, the game where you get to play as a cat and knock over bottles. Speaking of which, that game is amazing. You should go play it, even if you don't like cats. It's fucking great. It's just good. But either way, I don't need to extrapolate data in order for me to tell you that video games are getting worse. I could just fucking look at all the games that have recently come out and see it myself. EA essentially murdered the Mass Effect franchise with how poorly Andromeda was written. Remasters have become all the rage with AAA studios as of late, but the problem is they're willing to put in the work in order to make the remasters actually good. The Warcraft Reforged and the Grand Theft Auto trilogy are prime examples of how trash tier ports of games like just ruin the goodwill of the video game companies when they decide to remaster these games in the first place. Like, there's some good remakes, like Resident Evil 2 was amazing, but then they come out with Resident Evil 3, which was a absolutely subpar remaster that took out like some of the best parts of the game. And then of course, they're remastering Resident Evil 4 because, you know, that's the game that has to be remastered every generation. Fun fact, that is the most remastered game of all time. We're not talking about Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto 5. Nope, Resident Evil 4 is on like everything. I think the only console it's not on is on the DS and the PSP, and that's it. It's on everything else. They remastered Kingdoms of Amalur, the game that did so poorly, it almost bankrupted the entire state of Rhode Island. And on the title screen, instead of changing it to Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning, it still said Reckoning on it. They didn't even change the fucking title screen. That's how lazy these AAA studios have gotten. It's ridiculous. And it's not just remakes that are doing poorly as well. Even the new IPs are doing badly, mainly the ones that are trying to become live service games. Marvel's Avengers is the best example of how to take something that is absurdly popular and ruin it just on pure concept alone. The last of Marvel's Avengers movie made $2 billion in revenue. And that is like a 3-hour movie, and that's it. That's all it is. It's just a movie, and it made that much money. The video game still hasn't even recouped the fucking production costs of the game. That's how badly it's doing. Babylon's Fall is essentially a dead game, and that game came out this fucking year. And it's made by the people that made Bayonetta, the game that everybody plays with one hand. And like the newest Battlefield game is so bad the people are playing the previous ones that came out 6 years ago, and they didn't even like those games. There are still articles about how poorly designed and poorly developed Fallout 76 was, and that game came out 4 years ago, and they're still talking about how shit that game is. And don't even get me started on Diablo Immortal and how fucking greedy and absurd that game is. Which brings me to my next point. Why are video games getting worse? So why are these video games getting worse? Well, there's a common denominator between most of these video game companies and the worst rated games, and it's corporate greed. It's the day one DLCs, the loot boxes, the microtransactions, and other scummy ways for these companies to weasel money out of you is very common between all of these really poorly rated games. And companies will say that these video games have gotten more expensive to make. The production costs have increased, the marketing costs have increased, the cost for utilizing tools to create games and finding talent has all increased. And as much as I want to say that that isn't true or it's due to inflation, it really isn't. Companies are out there to make a profit, and since video games have exploded in popularity within the most recent years, there's a lot of companies out there and there's a lot of competition. And it's been harder and harder to find new gamers in this market since the majority of people do play video games. And you're never going to be able to get everyone to play video games. It's just not feasibly possible. Video game companies have to look to business models that generate the most revenue. And the most games that do that are large multiplayer communities with dedicated fan bases and constant engagement, like live service games. As much as I would like to say that if you make a good game, people will buy it and play it, that doesn't seem to be the case as more and more video game companies make more and more video games that are good or well-intended, and it doesn't make that much money. Games with microtransactions and other forms of monetization other than the initial purchase costs are a safe bet for video game companies to make as they continue to generate revenue well past their initial release date. And as time has gone on, video games have definitely gotten easier to make, but with the introduction to basic creation engines like the Unity and the Unreal Engine, there seems to be a plateau of innovation and on the production costs of things. With these titans of creation engines seemingly dominating the market, the cost per byte of new content has essentially stalled instead of continuing the downward trend that games were doing right before their introduction in 2004. There is a lot of contributing factors to the cost of games rising, and not all of that can be summed up as greed. None of it can be solved by one simple solution, which brings me to my next point. What can we do as gamers to help combat the rising costs of video games and the lowering quality of them? Now, what can we do to combat the rising cost of video games and the lowering quality of them? Well, we're doing a pretty good job at one of them, and that's speaking up when you see companies committing these egregiously greedy acts. If we see a company sticking their hands too deeply into the microtransaction market, Diablo Immortal, fuck you, Diablo Immortal, we must call them out for it. Making videos showing how the games are overstepping their bounds, and they must relax their storefronts or their trashy business practices, or else people won't be willing to play their games, let alone put money into them. Sadly, we must take that advice with a grain of salt, because not all games with microtransactions can be seen as greedy. Some of these games need these types of monetization in order to stay profitable, and we must criticize them from a well-informed platform and not a place of ignorance. Context is key in a lot of things in our world, and this is definitely one of them. You need to understand how these video games are made and how much it costs for them to be created in the first place in order for you to be able to properly criticize them. I know it is wild that me, the constant complainer of video games, is telling you that not all microtransactions are bad, but it is just an inevitable fact that video games will cost more money, and some games require more than just the initial purchase cost to maintain their value and create engaging content for you and the other players around the world to enjoy. And also, side fact, it is never okay to send death threats or harass anyone over things you do not like in a video game. There is never a point in a game that will affect you in real life or can damage you so much to threats to violence or insults. It's just never gonna happen. Like, no video game will cause harm to you, so you should not threaten harm on people that create them. That just creates a toxic environment and makes people not want to work in that field. And video games are supposed to provide art and happiness to people, and if you are so angry at a video game that you think that threatening someone's life is what you should do in order to get a better video game, you should stop playing video games. You should go outside and touch grass. Because, like, Jesus Christ, that's not okay. Another thing that we can do to help combat the rising cost of games is to help promote games that you like. If you like a game, maybe a smaller indie game or a bigger AAA game, tell people about it, promote it with whatever social media presence you have. It doesn't matter if you're a huge popular streamer or you're just like some dude that plays a lot of video games like myself. Don't pirate the game. Maybe even share it with others so they can experience the fun that you had with the game, and perhaps they might as well. Maybe they'll be willing to spend the money on it if they get to try it out more. Another way to combat this rise in costs is really more on the developers themselves, but stop drowning the market. Maybe 40 copycat games of a popular title is too much. Every year there's a new AAA game that does well, and then there's a multitude of copycat games that come out just hoping to ride the coattails of the most popular titles, and it really overflows the market, so the hidden gems out there of our generation become even more hidden. Dark Souls on its own created a whole new genre of games, and since its initial release there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of games that change nothing about the formula and just change the art or the setting and hope that some of the initial Dark Souls fans will find it and cling to it like they did with the original title. All in all, we have a lot of work to do ahead of us to combat this growing trend of in the gaming market, and I am ready to join the fight, and I hope you are too. I got a lot of this information from different places, but I did get a good amount of info from this VentureBeat article here. If you want to check it out for yourself, thank you for watching, guys. I hope you learned something today. I know I did. Make sure to like and subscribe as always, and have a good day, guys. Peace.